Boxing MMA picks. We are back with another prediction video. Now, we've been getting a lot of requests to get into boxing, in addition to, of course, some of the UFC prediction videos that we make. If you don't know by now, he goes by the name of Zan. I go by the name of Harris. And it's the same idea here with these boxing predictions. We want to give you that fight by fight breakdown, fight by fight analysis, very specifically from that betting perspective. Like I said, we've been getting a lot of requests to get into boxing more in 2022. We're definitely going to deliver on that. Boxing is both of our first loves. So we definitely are excited to give you some more boxing predictions throughout the channel in the year of 2022 and beyond. Make sure you subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks. Make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video. And make sure, of course, you subscribe to the channel and participate in the comments. We want to hear from you. The very first boxing fight that we have for the Boxing MMA Picks YouTube channel will be Keith Thurman taking on Mario Barrios. We have a pretty solid event here from PBC. Welterweight fight, two fighters coming off of their first loss. Keith Thurman losing to Manny Pacquiao, Mario Barrios losing to Gervonta Davis. Like I said, the name of the game is going to be the same thing here. Of course, this is going to be a single fight prediction video as opposed to an entire card like we've done with some of our UFC predictions. But, we're going to get right into it. Let's not waste too much time for the viewers. Let's kind of get right into it. Keith Thurman, Mario Barrios, welterweight fight here. I'm going to break down Keith Thurman first. Hasn't been the most active fighter. Suffered his first professional defeat to Manny Pacquiao. That was way back in 2019. That's the last time he competed. He had a majority decision to Josito Lopez 6 months prior to that. And then before that Josito Lopez fight, you would have to go all the way back to 2017, where he beat Danny Garcia. So you're looking at a fighter in Keith Thurman who's only had 3 fights over the last 5 years. 33 years old at this point. Can't necessarily say he's past his prime, but maybe not quite in his prime anymore. So that's going to be very interesting as he takes on the younger fighter Mario Barrios here. But we can't forget, Keith Thurman is a fighter with just one professional loss. He is a fighter who was considered the top welterweight probably in the world just a few years ago. Naturally, he has a bit more of an aggressive style. Decent jab. It is active, although it's not necessarily dangerous or a threat per se. Thing about Keith Thurman, he's going to give you good output. Multiple punch combinations. He does have good punch IQ. He'll go high, then he'll go low. He'll throw a straight punch, and then he'll follow it up with a hook or an uppercut. Really good punching diversity. He knows what he's doing in there. It's very intentional what he's trying to do in there. He does like to engage, though. He finds himself in those situations quite often. And personally, I don't think he does the best in those situations where both fighters are hitting each other at the same time. I think he's better when he's sort of working on his boxing. He can move around the ring, but I think it's something that works against him a little bit. If you can put the pressure on him, it can make him too reliant of fighting off of that back foot. I don't think he's as good fighting off of the back foot. I don't think he's as active fighting off of that back foot. It's a bit more of a runaway type of style, for lack of a better word. But, that said, again, it is decent movement. When he does incorporate his boxing with his movement, it does work pretty well. There were moments in that fight versus Josito Lopez where he got caught, especially in the second half of that fight. We saw it, Josito Lopez started to turn on the pressure a little bit, had Thurman on the back foot a little bit, had Thurman doing a little bit more running away, and, had some effective moments in the second half of that fight. That said, like I said, the overall movement is decent, decent fighting from the outside. And he can be a little bit chinny, right? I mean, we've seen him wobbled, hasn't necessarily gone down, but, we have seen him wobbled where you can see it. He's definitely hurt. The crowd gets excited. You can put the pressure on him. You can rack up points in those situations. We've seen Keith Thurman kind of vulnerable at those times, but Keith Thurman, really a fighter that's still pretty reliable, and I think will still be pretty reliable at this point in his career. He's taking on, of course, Mario Barrios, who has a good lead jab, uses his length. We see here he's going to have a 2-inch reach advantage, a half inch in height, probably a little bit taller when you actually factor in their heights, but at least a half inch on paper. Mario Barrios, uses that jab a lot, jab to the body, good counter jab. It's a longer jab than what Keith Thurman is throwing. A lot of body work with Mario Barrios. That's something that I really like about him. He will invest into the body work. Again, especially in those counter punch situations, he uses those body shots to his advantage. He does sit on his combinations. His combinations are a little bit limited. And what I mean by that is they're limited to really just 2 punches, maybe 3 punches. So he still has that opportunity to give a lot more in his combinations and be a lot more effective with his combinations. But for the people that he's gone up against, that 2 or 3 punch combination maximum has worked to his advantage, minus the Gervonta Davis fight, of course. He has solid pop, 17 KOs in 26 fights. Good sting on his punches, doesn't necessarily waste his punches, pretty efficient, pretty accurate puncher. But to that point, I don't feel like he has the highest work rate. And that's something that I can see maybe even working against him in this fight. He's much more inclined to take on that counter puncher role. I like his check left hook. I like his counter right uppercut. I think he has good technique. I mentioned it before. I think he has good accuracy as well. Even when he went up against a big puncher like Gervonta Davis, he was still looking to incorporate some of those same strategies and some of those same mythologies, or methods, I should say. He does use the ring somewhat well. He's not the lightest on the feet, doesn't have the most active movement, but especially with his longer reach, like at least against most of the opponents that he's gone up against, he looks to keep the fight at his range. And I think that's something that's very important to note. Another thing that's very important to note in this fight, and we can sort of see it listed here when we look at the weight. Of course, we know this is a welterweight fight. Barrios is actually coming up in weight here to welterweight, to 147 pounds, after being TKO'd at 140 to Gervonta Davis. He does claim that it is a more comfortable weight class for him, which is pretty believable because he has the size for the weight class. He can definitely fill out 147, but again, he was knocked out at 140, albeit to a very big puncher in Gervonta Davis, but nonetheless, he was still knocked out, or TKO technically in that fight. He was knocked down a few times in that fight, a few times due to headshots, a few times due to body shots. I mean, yeah, again, Gervonta Davis is a big puncher even at 140, but at 147, I mean, that's a whole different weight class. You have to think that could potentially cause some problems for Mario Barrios here. Also important to note, like I said, Barrios says he's comfortable here. He has competed at 147 in the past, so this won't necessarily be brand new to him, but his last several fights, or his last, I think, 4 or 5 fights, if I'm not mistaken, they were at 140, and that could potentially create a problem here for him. When we look at the odds on this fight, I'm going to flip over the Tapology here. We're seeing Keith Thurman at minus 180. I'm thinking Vegas is sort of underrating Thurman's ability here, or maybe putting too much value on Thurman's loss to Pacquiao, on Thurman's inactivity in the ring. Because when I'm looking at this fight and when I'm stacking these two fighters against one another, I'm not seeing where the threat against Keith Thurman is. I mean, again, we know Keith Thurman took on a fighter in his last fight where there were some threats with Josito Lopez, but I can't necessarily say I was ever worried for Keith Thurman in that fight. And I think the same is kind of going to be present here. I think Keith Thurman is going to use his combinations early. I think he's going to use his boxing early to establish himself in some of the early rounds, maybe the first 3 or 4 rounds. I can see definitely going in Thurman's favor. Is Thurman going to cruise to a victory? Probably not. I mean, is Barrios going to put him in situations of a little bit of pressure? I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case. But from a scorecard perspective, I can very much see this fight going in the exact same way that Keith Thurman versus Josito Lopez did, where Thurman had won that fight. I think it was 115, 113 on one judge's scorecard. I think it was 116, 112 on another judge's scorecard. And then for whatever reason, the third judge had it as a draw. I definitely had Keith Thurman winning that fight. But I can see a situation that's somewhat similar. And what I mean by that is Keith Thurman probably wins 5 out of the 6 rounds in the first half of the fight. Mario Barrios probably wins 3 or 4 of the final 6 rounds in this fight. And we're probably looking at a decision for Keith Thurman here. I don't think Keith Thurman knocks him out. I don't think Mario Barrios knocks Keith Thurman out. I'm actually thinking that Keith Thurman gets a decision here. We'll talk about Vegas in a second in terms of how we feel from a prediction standpoint with the bets specifically, because that's what we're here to give the viewers. But from just picking who I think is going to win this fight, I'm going with Keith Thurman all the way here. I actually think there's a lot of good value for Keith Thurman at -180. That's something I'm going to be all over. And again, we'll take a look at Vegas in a second after you give your breakdowns on. So how do you feel about this fight?
Man, honestly, I think this is a hard fight to break down. I know you have you have a lot of confidence in Thurman, which I understand. You broke it down really well. But he's coming off a 3-year layoff. So there's that concern, obviously, how he's going to look 3 years from 3 years from that layoff. So when you look at fighters like Sugar Ray Leonard, when he fought Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray was off for 3 years, came back. He looked really good. It was a controversial fight. I'm not sure which side you're on, but Sugar Ray looked good, and he got the win. And a really close fight that a lot of people think went either way. But regardless, that was against Hagler. So Sugar Ray came back 3 years later, didn't miss a step here at all. When you look at a fighter like Ricky Hatton, he took 3 years off, and then he came back and he got destroyed. He got knocked out, I think, in the 9th round of a 10-round fight. I remember watching that fight and just seeing Hatton go down, and that was it. So he wasn't the same guy. And Hatton's a guy that I believe he only had 2 losses at that time and over 40 wins. Hatton's the same guy that beat Costa Seuss. So in a sense, after 3 years, you're not sure where you're going to be, how you're going to look, whether he's going to come out looking like how Sugar Ray did, or whether he's going to come out looking like how Ricky Hatton did. When I look at these fighters, I think they both have good qualities here. I like Barrios' length. He knows how to use his reach. And again, as you indicate, he has a really good straight. He has a really good straight, a really good check hook. And these are things that he could catch Thurman with. Thurman's coming back from 3 years. I expect Thurman to be a bit rusty here. So I can definitely see Barrios definitely looking good in this fight. I can see this being a close fight. I think this is going to be one of those fights that can go either way. I give Barrios the hand speed. I think he has the faster hands, but I give Thurman the movement in the ring, the lateral movement, and I think Thurman is the better boxer. And I gotta think he has more power if they were to both land that shot. Again, as Harris indicated, Barrios got knocked out by a lighter fighter, but again, that fighter has heavy power. Keith Thurman, one shot. He was knocking people out, but he hasn't knocked out people in some years now. But again, Barrios is moving up in weight. So can he take the power at this weight? Will Barrios' power translate to this weight? So there's a lot of questions in this fight. Thurman being out for 3 years, how's he going to look? I think if Thurman's 80% of his last fight, he wins this fight. 70, 80%, I think he gets it done. Thurman, I hear him talking, he's taking it serious. So I think it's going to be a close fight. I think it could be controversial. I think it's going to the decision like Harris. But I think it's going to come down to Thurman's the better boxer. And I think he's going to be able to get some rounds here. But again, I can see Barrios making this close or even looking like he won the fight. and then the judges give Thurman the fight. He has a lot of close decision wins. The judges like Thurman, and I could see this getting sketchy here. These are both PBC fighters, and I know PBC doesn't have the best welterweights. So having Thurman get this win, you're looking at Thurman fighting Ugas or Spence. These are things that premier PBC can put together if Thurman wins. If Barrios wins, I'm not sure he's as much of a draw versus Spencer Ugas. I think those guys would be big favorites. But I think if Thurman wins, it kind of gives them a good fight that they can promote. And I think there's a lot of money in those fights. So I think this could be a close fight. I think it will be a close fight. But I think Keith Thurman here is going to utilize the experience he has in those tough situations here. The experience matters. And he has a lot of fights in championship fights against really good fighters. Barrios really only stepped it up in his last fight against a much smaller guy. And Thurman is a natural welterweight. If he's 80% from his last fight, he should be fine here. And I like Keith Thurman to get it done. And I think if this is even a close fight or even a fight where Barrios might have edged it by a round, I think the judges will still pick Keith Thurman to win the fight. So Keith Thurman's my pick to get his hand raised, but I see Barrios looking really good. I see him putting on a good showing, but I see the judges giving the decision to Keith Thurman.
There you have it. Both of us on the side of Keith Thurman. Before we wrap up, let's kind of take it to Vegas here. We're seeing Keith Thurman anywhere from -180 to, this platform showing him at almost a -190. So, if you were to bet Keith Thurman straight up on the win, $100 will return 153, $250 will return 383 as just a straight up bet, which is not the worst thing, because I think you bring up a lot of great points in terms of PBC having an interest in Keith Thurman winning this fight. I absolutely agree with that. If we were to look at some of the other parts of betting here, whether it's method of victory, whether it's fight going the distance, is there anything else that you're potentially considering, or would you just pick Keith Thurman straight up to win?
Man, as far as betting, you know me, I like to get the win. So I'll probably just go Keith Thurman just to get the win here. I wouldn't use this website Betway with that draw option, because again, this could be a close fight. So I'd like to use one of those websites that is either win or loss or draws a void. But again, I would go Keith Thurman. But if I have to look at one of these method of victories here, I'm leaning towards Keith Thurman by decision here. He hasn't knocked out anyone in some years. I know my only concern is Barrios is moving up in weight. Can he take the power? So there is the option. There is a chance that Thurman knocks him out. But when you look at Barrios, he hasn't, aside from his last fight, he hasn't really been knocked out. And he hasn't fought the best guys, but I'm going to go Keith Thurman here because a lot of his fights have been going to decision. So I think that is a good method to look at.
Yeah, I'm gonna completely agree, and I am gonna echo here. You probably want a two-way decision when picking a winner. Be careful with websites or betting platforms that have that sneaky draw in there. We've seen a lot of instances where fights have gone to draws, and that would be a loss in this situation. So, you definitely want to choose Keith Thurman on the win, but you want to find a betting platform for yourself that is a two-way decision as opposed to a three-way decision. And I am going to completely echo what you mentioned. I think Keith Thurman by decision has some good value with it. $100 would return $275. $250 will return $687. But I am going to also raise that cautionary flag in terms of Barrios is stepping up in weight. This could be one of those TKOs where you don't necessarily agree with it, but like we said, PBC probably has a vested interest in Keith Thurman winning. It wouldn't surprise me if accumulation of punches, whether Barrios is hurt or not, prompts the referee to step in and kind of prematurely stop the fight. And of course, that would make that decision pick a loss in that situation. So I agree with you. I think, I'm more so somebody that's going to go for the win rather than the money. So I am looking at Keith Thurman straight up in this one. But if I was to look for a method of victory, I think Keith Thurman by decision has a lot of good value to it. But let's wrap it up there, man. Let's wrap it up there. First boxing prediction for the At Boxing MMA Picks YouTube channel. You know the deal by now. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video. Most importantly, we want to hear from you in the comments. How do you feel about this fight? How do you know, who's your winner? What method of victory do you think is most likely within this fight? And what fights do you want us to review next? You know, definitely we're taking some submissions on that. We want to be able to serve the people here. But, you know, treat this as just a precursor of what's to come in 2022 from Boxing MMA Picks. A lot more boxing predictions to be included in addition to the weekly UFC predictions that we do. If you haven't seen those videos yet, please make sure to check those out. Let's officially sign off, though, at Boxing MMA Picks. He goes by the name of Zan. I go by the name of Harris. And in our usual fashion, let's get this money.
Let's do it.